Hey, good afternoon, folks. Luke Swetland here from the Museum of Natural History. We'll have some folks still signing on, so we'll talk about a few other things before we get to the heart of the matter. Welcome to the third Lunch and Learn webinar of 2022, presented by the museum's Planned Giving Advisory Council. For over 100 years, the museum has been committed to education and is pleased to offer a wide variety of programs, both in person and virtual, like today's Lunch and Learn about digital assets in estate planning. Before we get started, I want to reassure you all that the museum did survive the summer and the heat wave. Our dinosaurs are still roaring. The Sea Center is open without the crowds of tourists, so this is a good time to visit the Sea Center. We have a fabulous show of Edward Curtis photos opening this fall, so stay tuned for that. And I'm delighted to announce we are launching a new annual event called Creep the Halls. So this is our Halloween themed event. And this year's inaugural Creep the Halls is going to be Midnight Circus on October 29th. This is an adults only Halloween party. We're going to take over the entire museum, have live music, great food, always great wine, and a lot of unexpected cool activities. So please buy your tickets online at sbnature.org. So now, to get to today's program, I'm going to turn it over for a moment to my colleague, Caroline Baker, the museum's Director of Development. Caroline?
Thanks, Luke. Good afternoon. As Luke said, I'm the museum's Director of Development, and we are happy to share with you this free webinar with helpful information on your digital legacy and how you should document this in your estate plans. The program is presented by Plan Giving Advisory Council member Brett Piersma. Time has been allotted at the end for questions. Please place your questions in the chat that you should see at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical issues during today's program, please email Allie Nygaard at anygaard@sbnature2.org. This is the email address that was included in your meeting notification. And feel free to reach out to me or Andrea McFarling, the museum's new staff member who handles legacy giving, if you have any plan giving questions or need more information. We're here to help you leave your legacy, and hopefully you will keep the museum in mind in your planning. Now I would like to introduce Brett Piersma. Brett is an estate planning attorney and partner at Mullen Henzell. He attended law school at the College of William and Mary, and prior to his law career, he was an AP government and history teacher. So I'm going to hand it back over to Luke, and he's going to get us started with some conversation with Brett.
Great. Thanks, Caroline. Brett, so good to have you here. You know, folks, just a couple of observations. I was chatting with Brett about the topic of today's talk, and I was reminded that 30 years ago, when I was finishing my master's degree in library science and archival administration, when we talked about electronic records, we were only talking about records that were being produced and managed in a corporate or a government setting. None of us had a digital footprint. In 30 years now, our digital footprint has become invasive and inclusive of everything in our life, you know, whether it's cell phones, digital cameras, online banking, Facebook, social media. It's so permeated our lives, I think we forget how much of our life we live in a digital domain. And that's why today's topic is so important. And even just 2 years ago, during the lockdown, Stacy and I redid our will and estate plan, and we had a great attorney we were working with. There was no mention of dealing with our digital assets. So what you're hearing today from Brett, folks, is really cutting edge stuff that we all need to be mindful of as we plan for our estate. So Brett, I'm going to take you through the speed round. I have 4 quick questions, and these are the areas you're going to cover. So can you just give us a highlight? What are digital assets?
Yes, thanks, Luke. Appreciate that introduction. And times changed. You're right with the way in which so much of our life is driven by digital assets or connections to the world through digital means. It's a great question. Well, what are digital assets? And the way the term is laid out, it kind of seems like it's an obvious answer, but it really is more complicated than it's just digital things. Digital assets are any asset that is in a digital form that you have a right or an interest to, that could be preserved through the internet only, or maybe it's preserved on a digital device at your home, but that has value of some sort. Now, of course, we'll get into discussing what value means and what value doesn't necessarily mean, but that's the quick answer to what digital assets are.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to hearing about the whole landscape there. So that leads to the question, Brett. So then what is a digital estate?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Luke. A digital estate would really just be all those things that you leave as a digital footprint behind. And as an estate planning attorney, I always want to add to that, when you leave something behind, what you're basically saying is to your family and the people that are going to take care of your estate, you're leaving it up to them to handle or to deal with or to struggle with, to dispose of, to consume, to transfer to somebody else, or to terminate, distribute. I mean, throw away sometimes, it's you got an old couch in your living room. Well, that's part of your estate. If you've got an old account that doesn't have any value, but it has to be shut down, that is part of your digital estate. It's all the digital footprint stuff that you leave behind that has to be planned for and handled.
Great. And I'm reminded of that meme on Facebook, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And so the third question, if you bring that up, Allie, is why is it important to consider what happens to these assets when you pass away?
Yeah, some folks don't really care so much. In my many years, I say many, but in my years of practice in estate planning, it's remarkable to me how many folks don't care too much about what happens to their digital estate or certain things when they pass on. They say, hey, I'm not going to be around to see it, and I don't care. But other people really do. And so the short answer is because you may really care whether your son has access to your Netflix viewing history, or the comments that you left on somebody's Facebook page, or your online gaming history in your retirement years, how much you spent, you may care. And if you care, it's important to consider how it's going to be handled and who's going to have access to it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the more we think about what we've done in a digital domain, probably the more concerned we should be that we're really taking care of this stuff appropriately. And finally, I know the fourth area you're going to cover, Brett, of course, is how can you plan for the disposition of your digital estate? And that is going to be the meat of the matter. So can you just give us a quick highlight on what you'll be covering a little later in the presentation?
Absolutely. Yeah. How you can plan for your digital estate and where it goes is going to be really the meat of the conversation. And what it comes down to is make sure you have an estate plan that addresses it. And that estate plan probably should be, you should review that estate plan with your estate planning attorney and consider carefully each particular digital asset that you have and what you want done with it. And so we'll get into the discussion on what those different categories are in the presentation and how you can think differently about each one, the ones that have value versus the ones that don't really have value other than sort of sentimental value.
Great. Well, then I'm going to just turn it over to you with the note that we are recording this. So we are preserving this digital conversation, Brett, so that we can get it out to people that might have missed today's conversation. So thank you. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Luke. So in some respects, this presentation will be part of our digital legacy, yours and mine, and the museum's. So let's get into more detail about what digital assets are and what they aren't in a way. Well, according to the probate code in California, and you don't want to always go just to the probate code because there are other ways to understand what digital assets are. But in the probate code, there's a section that describes section 871 that says, here's what digital assets are. Electronic records in which you as the individual, the decedent who has passed away, has a right or an interest. Now, you have to have a right or an interest in something for it to be part of yours, for you to own it. But note this interesting sort of secondary definition. The term digital asset does not include an underlying asset or liability unless the asset or liability is itself an electronic record. What does all that mean? Well, these terms, electronic record and assets and liabilities, are defined in the code, in particular electronic record is. But what it comes down to is things like the investments in the brokerage account are not part of your digital estate, right? Because the investments are the thing that are underlying, and maybe you use an online portal to get to that brokerage account, but the investments themselves are not part of your digital estate. So that's part of your regular estate. The cash in your checking account, even though you have online banking, that doesn't mean all of your checking account is part of your digital estate. Similarly, the hard drive in the closet from the last, 8 computers that you had, where you just took the hard drive out and put it in a box. Now you've got 8 hard drives. Those hard drives themselves are not digital assets, but of course, the information stored on them is a digital asset. And so that's important to understand, that you have to plan for the physical aspect of the item in order to be able to plan for the digital aspect. So as we sort of get into the details here, I want you to think in 3 broad categories of what digital assets are. And this will help you sort of narrow down, well, what do I want to do with each of these categories of assets in my own estate? So category 1 would be things that only exist in the digital universe, and that access to them is fundamentally through the internet or a computer. In other words, the thing does not exist separate and apart from the internet or a computer. It can't exist. And so good examples of that would be things like your email accounts, your Netflix, iTunes, Dropbox account, social media, Facebook, Instagram, all these things here. Things like cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency doesn't exist without digital keys and without there being some digital footprint. Whereas a brokerage account or a checking account, arguably in the olden days, they would have an evidence of what you put on deposit in a physical book in the, in the bank. So those are quite different. But here, things like, as you look at this list, you can see how some of these will have value and some of them will have no value. It'll just be a pain in the neck to deal with when you pass away. For example, closing down your Netflix account. It's going to take time and effort to do that, but there's no money there. In fact, Netflix will probably say, oh, you owe $7.99 for last month's Netflix, account before you can close the account. But some of these have great value. Of course, cryptocurrency can have great value, and website domains themselves could also be valuable. So all of these fall under the only digital aspect or the only digital category. But what about things that exist both digitally and physically, or the digital has to exist on a physical item that you own and have complete control over? Obviously, things like your email account exists on a server or hard drive somewhere, but you don't own that server or hard drive. But a digital storage device like a hard drive or a thumb drive or data disks, those exist physically in your closet, in your drawer. And so the information on them is your digital estate, but it's intertwined with the physical item. And lastly, assets that really are not digital at all, but where access to them is through an online portal. And that's the great example of things like financial accounts, brokerage accounts, savings, CDs, treasury bonds. Many clients of mine want to plan for the disposition of some of their accounts through giving access to their kids or grandchildren during their lifetime and saying, here's my login, here's my password. When I die, just go in and take it. That's not how you're supposed to do it. But many people say, well, it's going to be easy, it's going to be fast, and that's how we want to do it. Again, I don't recommend it, but if you provide that digital access, now you've provided access to the physical value in there, in that account. I want to point out also that notice the very last bullet, debt, service-based accounts like credit cards, mortgage, utilities. We don't think of debt as an asset. In fact, it's a liability in an estate. And yet sometimes we think of it as part of your digital estate, because to handle something that is only evidenced in an account, the family member has to be able to get to it. And so providing them access, and we'll talk about this in the very last segment of the presentation. How do you plan for all these? With respect to accounts, there's a way to do it that keeps you safe and secure now, but also makes sure that people will have the information that they'll need at the time. It looks like we have a question.
Hey, Brett, I just want to jump in, and it's a good thing for people to remember too, because so much of our digital world lives on physical things like hard drives or those good old 4.5-inch floppy disks from the 1970s. It's also important to think about are you managing all your digital stuff so that you still have the hardware and the software to be able to look at it, or to be able to, so your kids or your estate can look at it too? So there's a lot of maintenance that has to go on during your lifetime.
It's a great point and a good question, really. A lot of my clients are taking their old, and we think of digital being, zeros and ones. The olden days, a lot of that stuff was stored magnetically on like a floppy disk. And so those kinds of forms of storing data, a lot of them have been digitized. A lot of my clients will do this. They'll actually save that information on a Dropbox account. So no longer is it on a floppy drive in the drawer or on a CD drive. Remember when we used to burn CDs to hold all of our photos from the vacation we just went on? I have a drawer full of those. You can digitize, well, those are already digital, but you can digitize your other non-digital assets and put them into a Dropbox account or save them in a folder. And so that's right, Luke. It's a great point. Sometimes, if you had an old Microsoft, Windows 95, some of the programs that open those documents no longer exist or are no longer updated. So it could be that it's too late, or it will be too late when you pass away for that to be recoverable without your family having to hire, a company that does data recovery and, is able to create an access point through that. To that asset. So that's a good pointer. And as an estate planning attorney, I don't have an answer to that question for my client. I can just say that is an issue, and to resolve it, we need to talk to somebody who has the technological ability and the know-how about, at what point are some of these, the hardware is no longer serviceable, and what can we do? So let's take a little sidebar as we talk a little bit more about what digital assets are. The California Probate Code, Section 850 to 884, it really does have some interesting language, and you might want to sit, with a glass of wine one evening and just pull out the probate code and read it. Don't ever quote me as having said that, because it'll put you to sleep if the wine doesn't. But California does have a pretty decent codified set of rules for what you can do with your digital estate and what you really can't. And it's called the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act of 2017. And I'm not going to go through all of it, of course. It's fairly lengthy, but it does the following three important things, which is what I appreciate about it. Number one, it defines terms. So it says, here's what an account is. This is what we mean by account. Here's what we mean. Here's what the code means, and California recognized as a digital asset. Here's what information is. Now, that may seem like a silly thing to define information, but in the context of planning a digital estate, it's very important. What is information that qualifies, and what is information that doesn't qualify? So take a look at those definitions. Two, it provides guidance, and people like me who help families plan their estate, having some form of guidance that we can all kind of look to in the code, in case law or decisional law by courts is very helpful, because it gives us tools that we need. So this provides guidance for people like me, for users like you, people who are users of technology, for custodians like Facebook and the companies that you're signing on to, and for fiduciaries like your trustee, your executor, the power of attorney that you granted your agent under that power of attorney. So it allocates to all these parties rights and rules and responsibilities as to who gets to do what and how they get to do it. So it's a great resource for all of us. And it provides, number three, which I'm going to get into a little bit more here, what I like to think of as a tiered structure of the order in which forms and estate plan documents can be interpreted where there's a conflict. And I'll get into what that means in a minute, but it really helps us to when there's a conflict between two sets of documents, how do we resolve that? When one party says, oh, I should get that access to the Facebook account, and the other party says, no, Dad didn't want you to have it. Dad wanted me to have access to his Facebook account. What do? We don't want to fight or a conflict with beneficiaries. So here's a summary of what that means. The base, the default provision in the code in 873 is that when you sign up for an account, Facebook, Instagram, Netflix, Dropbox, If you do a lot of online gaming, you'll know what Minecraft is. You create a Minecraft account. I don't know how many in the audience spend a lot of time on Minecraft. I know my children do. They're not planning their digital estate quite yet, but some of you may have old video games that you now play online. Well, when you click on to create an account, you click on terms of service and you agree to certain things. Among them, what will happen to your account when you pass away. So that's the default provision. So that applies and it governs unless there's number 2, a will or a trust or a power of attorney document that says specifically, here's what I want you to do. Here's who I want to have access to it. So, hey, Facebook, my daughter, Christine, is going to contact you and here's what you tell her to do. Here's what she gets to do with my account. And that's number 2. So number 2 trumps number 1, meaning that if you have terms of service agreement, but you have more specific details in a will or trust or some other testamentary instrument, that's better because it trumps number 1 and it provides more clarity. Number 3 trumps number 1 and number 2, and that is specific instructions in what's called an online tool. Now, online tool is defined in the probate code as some mechanism whereby you click through and make choices online when you're setting up your account. And I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. Or maybe you have a separate agreement. So let's say you come up with a separate written agreement with, let's use Mojang. Mojang is a company that has a lot of video games, among them Minecraft. And you may say to Mojang, hey, here's what I want you to do with all of my gaming websites and all of my avatars and all of my accounts. And they'll do that. And that specific instruction will trump anything that you've written in your will or in your trust. So let's take an example. Terms of service agreement. Here's an example of one, and this is from Netflix, and you can find it on the Netflix Help Center. And it's pretty straightforward. Step 1, the person's died, and so your heirs, your daughter, your son, your grandson, will log on to the account. Netflix actually says, hey, if you have access to the account, go ahead and log in. Just pretend you're your grandpa. Go ahead and log in as him, and then cancel the membership. Make the final payment and we'll be done. We'll close the account. Okay. Well, what you can see here is that if your grandson logs into your Netflix account, then before they click delete, they might say, I wonder what grandpa used to watch. And that may be just because they're curious. I mean, I'm sometimes curious what my dad is watching on Netflix and he'll tell me like, oh, I got this great new series I'm into and we'll talk about it. That may be interesting for the family. Your kids may really care. Oh yeah, I want to know what dad was doing or mom was doing, just the things she was interested in, what kind of series and shows, that she was watching. So Netflix is okay with that. Netflix is okay with you logging in as the deceased person and then closing the account. Now, you as the deceased person may not want that to happen when you pass away. So you may say, I'm not going to give anybody access to my account. In that case, you can see what happens. Your family doesn't have access to the account. They have to contact Netflix, provide a little information, fill out a little information form, make payment for the final amount, and then Netflix will close the account. In that process, the family is not going to have that viewing history as sort of part of your digital legacy. So which of those do you want? Do you want the viewing history to be something they know about and preserve and remember and that kind of thing? Or it's gone and it's no longer accessible? Okay. Now, I will say as another little sidebar here, there's a provision where in the code where if you do not provide a mechanism for your family to get access to the digital record, and your family can prove that having that is going to be very important for some reason to the family, for some financial reason, or for something to preserve evidence, a court will issue an order requiring Netflix, we'll just use the Netflix example, to go ahead and preserve all that viewing history and then to make it available to the family, but only with a court order. So there's a way around this if it's important. And if it's more just like, oh, we're curious, then that probably wouldn't satisfy it. Number 2 is, as we said, going up the chain from 1 to 2, the next level, the better way to do it versus the best way, number 3, is from a will or trust or a power of attorney for financial matters or for some other record where you say, I want to disclose or allow the custodian to disclose this information about my digital estate to a fiduciary, to my trustee, to my executor, or to my agent under the power of attorney. Here's an example from Dropbox. Dropbox respects the security and privacy of our customers. So if somebody's passed away, here's what you can do. Number one, request access to the account, and you'll just need to provide documentation that the person's deceased, so from a death certificate, and that you have legal right to the person's files. Well, how do you show them that you have the legal right? You send them a copy of the will that says, I want Jessica to have access to my Dropbox account. And if they get that, and they see the death certificate, they should provide access to that account. Now, think about Dropbox. If you don't know what it is, it's a mechanism where you can store your information online. It's a cloud-based storage account that you pay if you go over a certain number of gigs, and you pay a certain amount. But you could store all of your digital record in Dropbox, photos, documents that you've drafted, things like that. And when you die, if nobody has access to the code to the account, then it's gone. But if you say, I want my daughter to get access to it, you don't have to give her the account now, the account password and all that, but you can give it to her in your will. Dropbox will honor that and then create what's called a support ticket to grant that access. Okay, so that's where you provided something in a trust or a will to provide that access, and that works. Now you may say, well, I want to be very specific. And Facebook, for example, provides a way for you to be very specific, and that is through what's called an online memorialization setting tool. So this is from the Facebook Terms of Service. Paragraph 5 in their Terms of Service says the following: you can designate a person called a legacy contact to manage your account if it is memorialized. What that means is you have to go in and go to your memorialization settings in Facebook. I think this applies to Instagram as well, where you click on through a bunch of options. What do you want made available? What do you want your account to look like when you pass away? It'll say in memorial of this person when somebody goes to that site after you die. Now, if you want your daughter to be able to manage it and to delete things and to post things, then you can add that setting. There's a whole bunch of detailed stuff that you can put in there. So there you get to sort of express exactly what you want. And that's really great because you get to say, don't show my posts, but show my photos, or don't show my photos to everybody, but show this. Allow my daughter to delete the account, or don't allow her to delete the account. So as a little note on this, on the side, you'll see, please, 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 if you do want to go in and give somebody the power to be your legacy contact, where they're going to manage this account, think real carefully about who that person is. Let's say you have 3 children and you give it to one person of the 3. Is that going to hurt the feelings of the other? Is that going to create dissension or a conflict between the others? Or is that one person that you're granting the power to going to potentially make some mistakes or abuse the power or not carry it out properly, and that's going to upset other family members? So just be real careful who you do this, who you grant this power to, because it's a pretty far-reaching and broad set of powers once you name them as the legacy contact. Okay. Well, we've gone through question 1. What are digital assets? Well, what is a digital estate? So I think the answer to that should be very obvious from what we've just described. And that really is, at the very least, it's the sum total of all of the electronic records you left behind for others to inherit, to handle, to deal with, or really to lose, to neglect, to avoid handling, and to ignore, right? Your account could sit there idle for years and years and eventually get deleted if you never have somebody handle it for you, or close it, or memorialize it, that sort of thing. But electronic, and this is in the definitions in the probate code, electronic actually includes digital, magnetic, and optical. Well, optical, what's an optical estate? The stuff that I have left behind that's optical, your CD collection, right? Those are things stored on an optical drive or an optical disc. Would be things like your compact disc collection. So the information on that. Again, I've mentioned the hard drives before. Really important to say, okay, well, the hard drives, there's no account that gives access to the hard drives, but they're in the closet. So how do I let my family have access to them? If you've encrypted the information on the hard drive, then they could take the hard drive, plug it into a computer, but they're not going to be able to read the information. But if you put on your will that I want that my son has access, I want my son to have access to what's on the hard drive, then you may have to send that hard drive in, the son may have to send it into a company that is able to sort of crack the code, so to speak, or to get access to it, along with, and they pay a service fee for all this, or file a petition with the court to create an order by the court that allows the son to get the code to get into the hard drives. But if you just provided the password to your hard drive and instructions in your will that says, I want my son to have the physical hard drive, or in your trust, then now the trustee of your trust says, okay, we have the box of hard drives, we're going to give it to the son, and we're instructed to give, let the son have them as a gift. And then the son now can get access to that account, can log in because he has the password. So that's a way to do it. It's maybe not the only way or the best way, but it's a way if you have a large collection of old hard drives or CDs, that sort of thing. But the summary of this slide really is that even if technically things like your hard drive is not considered part of your digital estate, because again, it's a physical thing, it still needs to be planned for, and it does have a digital aspect that should be thought through and considered. Number 3, why is it important to plan? I think I've mentioned this a little bit during the presentation, and I hope those of you in the audience have begun to sort of think in your head, well, does any of this matter to me? And maybe you say, none of this really matters to me at all. Or maybe you say, boy, some of this matters, some of it doesn't. It's kind of an example. I'll give you an example of in my estate planning practice, where some people say this about their tangible personal property, like their furniture and their jewelry and the old pots that they have in the drawer, they've been using for 50 or 60 years. Sometimes they say, I don't really care who gets that stuff. Just have my family distribute it and everybody gets something that they want. That's great. Other people say, I really want my grandson to have the cast iron pot, because he's been looking at that for 25 years. For some reason, he loves the cast iron pot because I used to make casserole in it all the time. And my granddaughter really wants my earrings, my diamond earrings. The rest of it, you can all distribute equally. So you may care about a few things, but not care about the rest. And so that's why it's important to plan, because you want to express your wishes for what to do with the things you care about. And if there are things you don't care about, then make that known too, so your family can handle it, the way they see fit. Think about these answers to that question too. And again, you can have your own answer, of course, but your digital legacy will impact how you are remembered in your online presence, your online legacy. In other words, some people will remember you, at least in part, through your online legacy. And if that online legacy is gone immediately, then they'll remember you for different things. Or if it's preserved, and for example, I know my mother has a memorial page on Facebook for when she passed away. So her family and friends, we can all go on there and see that. And her old friends from childhood friends are popping up there and posting little comments on there. And it's so neat to see people that knew my mother way before I was around commenting and putting little comments about her on there. So that's really neat. So it affects how you're remembered, and that may matter to you. It also affects how others what they'll know about you that they don't know about you now. And that could be, really in the context of what your family learns about your digital footprint after you pass, by finding out that you spent, 30 or 40 hours a week on online gaming during your retirement years. That's great if that's what you like to do. Do you want your kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids to know that? And do you want them to see the avatars? I hope you guys know what I mean by avatar. It's what you look like online. If you have a digital image that's you, in a sense, in a gaming context or some other account. There's lots of ways that this pops up with your online presence. But do you want that revealed to your family or not? Lastly, or second to last, there could be real value in the assets. There's an example of someone who invested in domain names. Domain names are like websites. So bankofamerica.com. Before Bank of America, had the online website, somebody could go in and buy that domain name and then, go buy a bunch of domain names. Now that's a digital asset. It only exists digitally, and it has value. You could sell if you owned bankofamerica.com, or if you owned, cryptocurrency.net, somehow you bought that, and it's not owned by any big company, you could then sell it to a company for many, many thousands of dollars. Same thing with account balances. Let's say you have an iTunes account. For some reason, you had all these iTunes gift cards and you put them on your iTunes account and it's got, $600 on there. There's value there. So your digital estate may have both personal sentimental reasons and value to it, but it may also have real value, dollars and cents value. So there's the sentimental and emotional part of it. And so think about what your family may care about too, what you care about, but what your family may care about. So last main category, and then we'll have some concluding remarks and we'll have some time for comments and questions. How can you plan for your digital estate, the disposition meaning where it goes? How can you plan for that? Well, number one, and I don't want to step on the toes of your own estate planning attorney. So work with your estate planning attorney to devise a plan. In other words, your attorney, if you have one, may already say, oh, here's what we do with our clients. Here's the way in which we advise our clients. And there may be a great set of tools that your attorney has that they can give to you. Hopefully that plan involves the following: inventory everything, inventory all of your digital assets and accounts. And that means things like passwords, key codes, secret questions and answers, and take all that information and create a single document with that information on it. Now, if you do that and you've got the single document, you can either say to your estate planning attorney, hey, I've got this document, here's where it is. I have a client who did this. He took me back to his office and he showed me the drawer where he saves that information. He said, okay, Brett, you and my wife are the only one the only two who know about this, where it's at. So when I die, this is what you need to get to. And that's a way to do it. Now, you may also be concerned about the security of that document, if it's printed out or if it's saved on your computer and it's got all the passwords and all of the account names and all that. You can store that save that document and encrypt it and store a master password for the document. So in other words, you've got a key that gets you into that document then gives people access to everything else. But you may also print the document and put it in a safe deposit box or put it in your safe in your closet. Maybe give a copy to your estate planning attorney so he or she can put it in his or her file. There's also password management systems. You can go online and there's a series of companies you can use where they'll manage all your passwords. And then if somebody has one key password to get into that management system, they can have everything. And that's another way to do it. But certainly talk to your attorney and make sure that your attorney has given you some advice on this. But these are some ways to do it. Again, the previous discussion about putting information in your will and your power of attorney, if you want, filling in the online tool, if there is one for the particular account you're concerned about. And then maybe you take that information and you put it on your master document. You say, Facebook, I've filled in my memorialization settings and here's what they are. So that's all part of your master document. That would be a great way to do it. You do it on the online tool and then you document it in a single file that your family can have access to when you pass away. So I've got one concluding slide. And again, hopefully if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat and we'll be addressing those. I think Luke might have one now.
Hey, Brett. Yeah, I do have a couple of questions that have come up. Can you have different agents for different types of digital assets? So like in your case, you may have your professional records at home on your computer and then your personal records, and you want to deal with those differently, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can and you should. You should carefully consider who would be best suited for each of the different roles. So you may name a child as the legacy contact for your Facebook account, but you may name somebody else as the person responsible for handling your Dropbox account, which has lots of important data, sensitive data and information, access, photos, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
Great. And someone is asking, are airline points considered a digital asset?
They are, and for that you should check with the going back to the early slide where we had the terms of service. There are some airline miles programs that I've heard of. I've never experienced them where they don't transfer, that when you pass away, they die with you, unfortunately. Others, there is a way to use them, but you have to read the terms of use in the agreement when you sign up for those.
Okay, thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned the Yeah, there are a number of software programs, apps out there to manage passwords.
Yeah, that's great. And another interesting aspect of that is my father came up with this years ago, and I don't remember where he got it, but he's shared it with me, that for all of his accounts, and again, this is if you want to give your family access to accounts, that they'll be able to access now if you trust them, and after you die, as opposed to saying, I'm going to provide access through my testamentary documents. In other words, if you want to give them passwords, and you are constantly changing your password, what my dad did is he came up with it's like an interpretive tool that allows you to figure out the password. So it's like, imagine there's 2 digits, there's a 6-digit code. The first 2 digits is a code for what type of account it is. 01 for social networking, 02 for financial account, 0 whatever. So for any account, if I wanted to log in, I'd say, oh, this is this kind of account. I know it's a 02. The next 2 digits are the year. So the year is 2022. So he changes that year every year when January 1 comes around. The next 2 is something else. And so he has a code where every one of his accounts could be accessed. Maybe this is a bad idea, but he's done this with me and my brother. He's given it to us. So every one of his accounts can be accessed. And all we have to do is know what the logic is behind the code. And it always works. So that's a way to do it as well.
Great. Marlene's asking, are cell phones considered a digital asset?
Great question. The phone itself is not. This is sort of one of those hybrids where the phone itself is not. And so if you said, I want my cell phone to go to my daughter because I just bought an iPhone 14 and it's worth $1,300, and she's going to then take it and use it, then she won't have access to the information on it. So the cell phone itself is not a digital asset, but the information on it and the information accessible from it are. And that's a really, really great question because it's so tricky. My cell phone, if you have my face, you could get on my cell phone and get access to my bank account, my investment account. You could also get access to my Amazon account and buy books for me. So those are the digital assets. The physical asset is not digital. So again, your daughter, if she gets the phone, she could take it to Apple and they would wipe it, delete it, and set it up as her own phone. And that would be a great benefit to her if she needed a brand new iPhone 14. But if what she's really after is the information on it, then that's separate. You'd have to provide the access through one of these other mechanisms.
Cool. All right, Brett, I'm going to let you get to your last slide and then we'll open it up to more questions, if that's all right.
Great. Absolutely. Yeah, the final slide really is, I wanted to provide just a screen, a one screen summary of here are what estate plan fundamentals are for those of you who are thinking now in terms of, well, my digital estate, but now I'm concerned about the rest of my estate. So an estate plan in general looks like this. It has these aspects to it. It has a trust generally. It has a will or wills, one for each spouse, power of attorney documents, what's called a general assignment of assets. And there are transfer documents. I didn't put in here healthcare directive because it doesn't really relate to digital estate, but I'm going to relate all of these to your digital estate. And then things like beneficiary designations. And so generally an estate plan kind of looks like this. For those of you out there who may be clients of mine, you've seen diagrams like this in our estate planning work here at Mullen Henzell. And so your estate plan kind of looks like this. If you had a trust, husband and wife, you've got during your joint lifetimes, the middle there is after one of you has died, and there's some sub-trusts that get funded and formed. And then finally, after the death, there's distribution to the kids. So how does your estate plan relate to your digital estate? Where does your digital estate fit into this? So the trust itself, so this up here, could very well provide instructions on what the trustee is allowed to do or distribute. And for example, the cell phone example, please give my cell phone to my daughter. And in your trust or in your will, you could even say, probably put this in your will, my daughter is authorized to gain access to X, Y, and Z on my phone. Now, your daughter is then going to have to do that, and that's going to be kind of hard. She's going to have to send the phone in probably to Apple with a copy of the will and the death certificate, and then maybe even a court order. There's a provision in the probate code about getting court orders to enforce some of these things if the entity, the custodian, is not agreeable to it. And let me just pause there because there's an interesting tension. I've been citing the California probate code which is again only, it's only in California. Other states have their own codes with different sets of rules. But these entities, these custodians of Facebook and Apple, they're nationwide, worldwide. And so when you send something in that cites the California probate code, they may say, "Oh boy, we gotta send this to our California attorney to tell us, Facebook, what to do with this, or Apple, what to do with it." So that's where the courts come in. If you file a petition and a court issues an order and you send that order to Facebook or to Instagram, they'll then say, "Okay, we have an order of a state court telling us to do this, and that these instructions are supported by the probate code." Then Facebook will say, "Okay, good, we'll do it. We'll turn over the information. We'll give so-and-so access," all of that. You don't want to have to go through all that, especially the family after you've passed away. But that's sort of that's the last resort if they really needed to do it, to enforce something that you put in your estate plan. So I put in here power of attorney, that third bullet point. That's where you can provide access to your accounts and your information if you become incapacitated. General assignment of assets, that's the document where you would put, I transfer all of my tangible personal property, like my cell phone, my couch, my hard drives, my jewelry, my CDs, right? All those things, physical things, can be transferred into your trust so that your trustee has physical control over them and can then carry out the terms of the trust with respect to anything that's digital related to it. Transfer documents, similar to the general assignment, you may have some documents that evidence your intent to transfer digital assets into your trust. And then beneficiary designations, which really relates to IRAs more than digital estate. But it does have a relationship because your IRA may again have a digital portal through which you can access the funds in there. So those are sort of the fundamentals of an estate plan and how they relate to your digital estate. And it looks like we do have questions, so I will advance the slide to the next question portion, and we'll handle some of these. We have a little bit of time. It's 12:47. So yeah, we'll field a couple questions here.
All right. Thanks, Brett. So we have a question here from Alan, whose deceased mother's book is still available on Amazon. So there may or may not be royalties. She did not leave any information regarding this, and her mail is no longer being forwarded. What can I do?
Great question. So the royalties are going to be separate from the Amazon account. And this will be, certainly talk to your estate planning attorney for more details on how to handle these kinds of things. But here you have, in a sense, two aspects. One is the book and the royalties from the sale of the book. Now, the royalties obviously are going to come through Amazon. So Amazon sells some of the books and their royalties, but the right to the royalties is not necessarily related to the agreement that your mother or grandmother, whoever it is, had with Amazon. May relate to the publisher of the book, right? So the publisher is going to get some, and so the royalties may go through the publisher. It just depends on how that was arranged. But yes, that's the kind of thing where if there's real value there, and there's nothing in a will or in a contract that your mother had with the publisher or with Amazon, if Amazon is the publisher potentially, I suppose, then you probably would have to petition the court. And again, it would depend on what your testamentary documents say. If there's a trust or a will, it could be that the will mentions something about royalties, or the general assignment does. But yeah, I've seen that situation before. We ended up in the situation I'm thinking of, had to work with Amazon and with the publisher to, I think the decedent had said something in his will. And so we were able to send a copy of the will and eventually create a new account for the surviving spouse. And she now had control over the account and could then take the royalties. But it was not an easy process because the decedent had not left very clear instructions. So if there's no instructions at all, you may potentially need some petition to the court to get an order instructing those assets to be given to the heirs.
Great. Yeah, clearly there can be a lot of hair on some of these things. So it's better to go to the salon before you pass away than let your heirs and executor try to deal with it on the backside.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a great question. Several people are asking, because I think they're in the same boat I am. If you've already executed your power of attorney, your will, and your trust, and now you want to deal with your digital assets, do you need to redo everything, or can you do an addendum?
Yeah, you probably, and I say probably because it really depends on what language is in your trust, your wills, your power of attorney documents. You probably don't have to re-execute everything, but step one would be to inventory what you have, inventory what accounts you have, what online digital footprints you have, those kinds of things, because then your attorney can look at them and say, okay, well, for these, you can use the online tool. And so online tools, remember any agreement that you have with Facebook, or if you filled out the online tool with Instagram, that's the best. You don't need anything in your estate plan if you've got that, because all that has to happen is your heirs send a death certificate in, and then your account switches over to that, and that your heirs have access because you've done it online. You've gone in, you've clicked your memorialization settings, so that wouldn't require anything to change. Now, if you wanted to grant access to one child but not the other, and specify who gets what and who gets to handle what, then yeah, you're going to need some new estate plan documents. You may not need a whole trust. You may need to just amend your will. And if you do, it could be, if you do have to amend your trust, no, you wouldn't need a whole new trust. You could do an amendment. Your attorney could do an amendment to your trust. It wouldn't require you to redo the whole thing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Folks are wondering, how frequently should you review your kind of digital asset management? More frequently than you would review all your other estate documents, or any thoughts there?
Yeah, your digital estate is going to change a lot more frequently, at least in my experience, than your other estate. The rest of your estate may go up and down. It may increase in value and decrease. Maybe you've got a new bank account, a new checking account, but the fundamentals of it will stay the same. I want my two kids to share equally in my estate. That's fairly simple. But you may open up a new account every few months. You may have a new social media account. So those you should probably revisit I would say every year or two. And when I say revisit, I don't necessarily mean revisit who gets to do what with which account, but revisit that you've updated your list of accounts and what the passwords are if you're going to have it handled that way. Yeah.
And that seems particularly important now, as we're always being prompted to change our passwords for security reasons. Mm-hmm. So updating that master document of your passwords, if you're not using kind of a password tool, seems really critical so that folks can get to what they need to get to.
Yeah, and I would also sort of take this opportunity to highlight that if you are creating a master list of the passwords, then remember what you're giving to your kids and your heirs is the ability to access the full part of your account, rather than saying, no, I want them only to be able to turn my account into a memorialization page or to close the account. So if you're giving passwords to everything, then you're saying you can take everything, view everything, and do everything you want. So that's, just think about that before you go and do that.
One of our participants is drolly observing that we better start reading the terms and conditions on every website before we sign up for things.
I would say don't worry too much about reading all the terms and conditions before you sign up. But once you've signed up, now go through the settings to see what would happen with that account. Because you don't want to decide not to sign up for an account simply because you don't like the way you don't like their online tool. But once you have an account, if you care how it's handled, then yeah, you should go through and see what their default policy is. See if they have an online tool that lets you customize it. And if not, then maybe consider having your estate plan address it.
Great. So we have one final question before we wrap up, Brett, and this one is great. Peter Schuyler is asking, what about genetic information stored in online DNA accounts? For example, Ancestry or 23andMe?
Oh boy. That's well outside my experience. So I won't answer that because I don't know the answer. I don't have any clients in that situation, but I do know that I've heard of clients in that situation in the firm, and I know some other attorneys who have addressed it. I also understand there's what's called the Genetic Information Act. There's an act in California that relates to your genetic information, separate and apart from digital. So there's two pieces there. One would be, of course, your ancestry history on ancestry.com or 23andMe. So that's sort of a digital asset. The other one is, well, what about my genetic history or any genetic material I may have left? Let's say I'm a sperm donor sort of thing. That's going to be very different. But the interplay between those is like, oh, well, here's my genetic history. It's also physical. And here's my 23andMe account. My guess is, and again, just a guess, that the ancestry.com, that's purely digital information about, your genetic data, and that it could be transferred through Digital Estates Act provisions. But if there's anything behind it, like something like some genetic material itself that has to be disposed of, that would be quite different.
All right, I'm going to turn this over to Caroline now, Brett.
Great.
Wow, thank you, Brett. That was a lot of information, and we really appreciate your time. For all of our participants, we're going to send you an email with the slideshow that we presented on the screen, so that if you didn't catch something, you can dive a little bit deeper into it. And here's our contact information. So if you have an additional question for Brett that didn't get answered, feel free to reach out to him directly, or to any of us at the development office, or Denise Stevens, who's our chair of our Plan Giving Advisory Council. So again, I think all of us are thinking more about our own health, mortality, and what kind of legacy we wish to leave. And as you consider your plans, I hope you might consider leaving a legacy gift for the museum. And I'm available to help with any questions you might have about doing that. The museum's Plan Giving Advisory Council is hosting a free seminar on the essentials of estate planning on Sunday, November 13th from 3 to 5 p.m. at the museum. I hope you attend. And again, thank you, Brett. That was just really, really incredible. Lots of great information. Thank you to Denise Stevens, who's the chair of our museum's Plan Giving Advisory Council, who helped coordinate this presentation. And thank you to you, all the attendees who joined in. I hope you have a great day.